Save it for who you came here to see, guys. I mean, good evening, everyone. My name is Jarett Wieselman. I work for Buzzfeed. I am extremely excited to be here with you this evening. If you're here, you're a huge fan of Outlander, so the person I'm about to bring up to the stage needs absolutely no introduction. Golden Globe nominee, Caitriona Balfe. Oh my God, look at that.
Hello.
Thank you so much for being here tonight, Caitriona.
Thanks for having me. This is very cool.
The episode we just watched, I thought was such an amazing episode to screen before this conversation because I really felt like it showed us the spectrum of what you get to do as Claire. You know, there was some dark, heavy drama. There was that was wonderful sort of watching her outsmart the men around her. You know, you got the romance. When you read this pilot script and sort of got to know this world, what was it that appealed to you about this character?
Well, I remember the first ever audition that I got sent was 2 scenes with 2 lines of a breakdown. It was like 1940s nurse, falls back in time, meets stashing Highlander. And you're like, okay, I guess I'll figure that one out. And then I met with, or my agent in London sort of sent me then a bigger breakdown, and but I'd still only 2 scenes, and I just sent in a tape, and Karen from Stars had been going through all the tapes. I think mine was like in a pile of, hundreds and hundreds, and eventually, they asked me to come back and do more, and it was then when I read the book. And it wasn't until I read the book that I got such a clear sense of Claire and how exciting it would be to play her. And, the funny thing was I never thought I would love fantasy. I never thought that this would be a show that would be like my kind of thing that I'd love. But you have such amazing parameters within this genre to not only do very real emotional work and very real life things, but then also do things that are just so fantastical that you just have such a range as an actor to play in, which is fantastic.
But I have to say, I mean, from the pilot, you're really the audience's eyes into this world, and you grounded it so quickly in your performance that it allows for those fantastical elements, I think. And when you thought about building her as a character, I mean, what was important to you in sort of those early days of figuring out who she was?
Well, I think, all my research, and it was a very quick process from the time I got cast to the time I was in Scotland. So it was kind of a mad dash of, okay, how am I going to figure this out? And, I went to the very, the prior circumstance, I guess, was the war. And I found these great books that were all first-hand accounts of nurses from World War II. And what was so amazing was just how real these people were. And I think as an actor, sometimes, when you go into period, you think that people are somehow different, that, well, they're from the 40s and this is how people in the 40s think. And it's like, well, no, we're the same people. And also, you would hear these stories of nurses who'd been on boats that had been capsized and they were out in the ocean for days, and then they would get picked up and then they would meet a soldier and get married 2 days later on the boat. And like that kind of just the thin edge between life and death, and how immediate everything was, and how just life was so rich because you didn't know if you had another day to live. And that was like such a key for Claire for me, that I wanted her to have that vibrancy and that zest for life because she'd lived so close to death for so long.
Yeah, I mean, it creates an urgency too, I think, in the material. She's driven by something that's sort of unavoidable in a lot of ways at this time.
Yeah, I mean, when you see her with Frank, and I love all the 40 stuff, and I love the relationship between her and Frank because I just think that that's so complex. But when we first see them, in a way, she's still a young girl. Frank is definitely the sort of, he has more power in the relationship, and he's kind of the educator, and he sort of, almost looks at her as, oh, Claire, you're doing that again, and so it was really nice to sort of play with that innocence and that youth in a way. And then when she goes back, or when she falls back through time and she meets Jamie and everything that happens in that time, I feel like that's when she really is born in a way, and she comes into her own, and that's where she meets Jamie and they're equals, and that's what was so different about that relationship compared to the relationship with Frank.
Yeah, I agree, and I loved even in the marketing material for season 1, the poster is, Claire reaching back for hands, and then when it came back, it was her holding a dagger, and it was the exact same image, just that was the only thing that had changed, and I thought that said so much so quickly about what this woman had been through in such a short span of time.
Yeah, I mean, she had empowered herself. And it's funny that back in a very much more patriarchal society and in a time where women had much less freedom and agency, but in some ways, Claire being an outsider, she was able to carve her own path, and she just didn't have to abide by anyone's kind of rules of society or whatever.
Yeah, and the commentary is so layered because it's a show being written in 2016 about a woman from the 40s in the 1700s. I mean, it really affords so many opportunities to sort of comment on the feminism and the patriarchy, and that has to be so exciting.
It is. It's interesting. When we started out, I mean, no one started out being like, oh, we're going to make a feminist show, you just can't, because if you tried to do that, it would probably be awful. But it's funny, Diana, our source material, Diana Gabaldon's books. I mean, Diana was writing her first book when she had 2 full-time jobs. I think she had 2 or 3 degrees, a master's degree, maybe 2 of them, and 3 kids. And she just was like, oh, I think I want to write a book. I'm going to see what it's like. And she wrote a book. And so if that's not the defining, if that's not a feminist, then I don't know what is. So, we just took Diana's essence and Diana's spirit. And then, everyone who works on the show, I mean, we've so many amazing women who work on the show. One's right there, Karen, say hi. And, half of our writing team are women. And, I just think that just by that very fact, it's imbued with a really strong sense of female empowerment, but our male characters are also really fully formed. And that's what I think makes our show interesting, because that way you get a balanced look at relationships and life and
Absolutely. No, I agree. And I would love to talk about, it's just too bad you and Sam have zero chemistry in the show. It kind of really takes you out of it every time. No, I mean, it's such a hard nut to crack in this industry, that ineffable thing that makes 2 actors click on screen that way. And I'm curious, you talked about the audition process, which we'll get into, but I mean, was there a lot of chemistry reads that had to happen before?
There was one. I mean...
and everyone saw it was like, sold, we're in, that's it.
Well, I think, I'd like to think it wasn't that they were just coming so close to the wire. They were like, yep, she'll do. We need an actress, any actress. But yeah, no, Sam was cast in June. I sent in my audition tape, I think, in August. So he was already, working out, building those big muscles that he has. And I was here in LA just twiddling my thumbs. So when my agent told me that they wanted to perhaps see me do a test, they had flown Sam to LA, and I just walked into a room, and I was running late, which you should never do, especially for a test. There was traffic, there was roadworks on Venice Boulevard. It was terrible. But I was sweating, and I was like cursing myself, and I walked in, and Sam was just this calm center in the room, and there was zero posturing and zero ego. And I remember, like, immediately we just started chatting about Scotland, and I had friends who lived there, and it was just like an old friend. And then when we got into the scenes, we just both really went for it. And at one point he had me in, there's one of the scenes, a big fight, and he had me in a bear hug, and I remember just being like, fuck you, and I like moved my arms, then his arm hit me in the face, and but it was great. And it just, we I think we have a similar approach to life, and we have a similar approach to acting, and it just works. And also we were very lucky that we had a lot of time once we started production for that relationship to kind of organically build. And as was our friendship. And I think that was just so important, because maybe if we'd had to sort of jump right in day one and maybe start, episode 7, the wedding, that day, it might have not worked as well. But, this is, sometimes you just get lucky. Sometimes the stars align, so.
Yeah, we were talking before. I mean, it was a very long production process on the first season. You said it was almost a full year just to produce year 1. I mean, that's the blessing and the curse, I think, of doing episodic television, in that you get to explore a character over years and years and watch them develop. But I mean, for you in the beginning, what did you discover was important to sort of keep that spirit and energy up to bring the character to life over such a long span of time?
I had no idea. I had never even done a guest star on a TV show. I had done very small parts in films. I'd done one indie film that was 5 weeks. That was my longest ever job, and a web series or 2. So I was green as they come, and I think, thank God, because if I'd have known the schedule that was ahead of me, I probably might have not been so chipper from day one. I would have tried to conserve some energy. But I was just so excited. I was so excited. I loved the show. It felt from day one, we had this great alchemy on set. Everyone around us was great. We have a great crew. We have a great cast. And also, Scotland's so beautiful. And I'm from Ireland, but it had been a long time since I was back in that part of the world. And in many ways, it felt like a homecoming. And you're standing out there in the middle of like these mountains, and it's wild and the wind's blowing. You can't help but be inspired. I mean, you can't help but just feel like you're in this big epic thing, because it just looks like that.
You are also in this big epic thing. You know that, right? Like, that is exactly what is happening.
But, it was just day by day. I mean, literally, I didn't know anything. What's tomorrow? Okay, you go. There was it was a steep learning curve for sure, season 1.
So in season 2, knowing now what you learned over the course of season 1, what did you change about how you approached season 2? Or did you change anything in terms of just, the ability to keep sustaining that?
We definitely changed a little bit about our schedule. In Scotland, in the UK, it's equity. So in the beginning, we were doing 11-day fortnights, which is a 6-day on, then a 5-day on. Not sustainable. So we definitely changed that. And you just learn how to protect yourself as an actor a little bit more. And also learning that you have a voice, and when you can use that, and when it's appropriate to use that. And that was a big thing, because obviously, I spent so long, I think all actors go through this, you spend so long just wanting a job that you're prepared to do anything. You're just like, please, like me, give me a job. And then you get a job and you're like, wait, what? And so it's a learning process of, learning where you're, where the boundaries are, and it's always a negotiation. And, we have a fantastic group of producers and our writers, and I feel very lucky. We have a great open dialogue as well with our writers, and that was also a learning curve, where you're like, oh, I can say, I'm not quite sure about this for my character, and it's learning also how to approach that. Like, that's a big thing. I think season 2 was the big, when we learned, okay, well, if we want to flag things, or how do we go about asking that, and where is that line between, I really feel very strongly about this for my character, and, well, this is what they need. So, that's a very interesting thing that you learn only on the job.
Absolutely. Well, speaking of, you talked about this, you want to, you as an actor, you want a job and you want a job. When do you remember sort of first feeling the pull of acting?
Oh, God. 3, 4, 5. I was that annoying little brat running around the house, just being precocious. And, I don't come from a very theatrical or anything background. You know, my father was a police sergeant and my mom was a stay-at-home mom, and I grew up in the middle of nowhere in Ireland. But my dad, weirdly, as the local police sergeant, he with a local teacher, a farmer, a shopkeeper. I mean, there's a joke in here somewhere, but and two other people, they had a comedy troupe. And I know, it's very bizarre. Seeing your 6'4" father who's a policeman dressed in a wedding dress, it can be very traumatizing to a 7, 8-year-old. You know, so I used to watch them do these plays, and I remember just getting into youth theatre very, very early on, like about the age of 7 or 8. My first role was as, oh God, now I'm blanking on his name. The play Oliver, Mr. Bumble. I was Mr. Bumble. I was a tall child. So I, you know, so it was just that and pantomimes, which is a thing that's really big in Ireland and the UK. But yeah, it was always there. And I went to college and I studied theatre. Dropped out after the first year, and then had a different career for 10 years before I came back to it.
Yes, after modeling, you moved to Los Angeles, and you really immersed yourself in sort of studying the craft at that point. Yeah, I mean, can you talk a little bit about sort of your foundations in acting? What kind of methods did you study?
God, yeah, but you know, it was one of those things. It's like you get to a point, and you're like, I have to do this, right? I'm about to turn 30, and I was, you know, I moved to LA, and it was just like, it's now or never. And I had read an article in Vanity Fair where Amy Adams was talking about an acting school that she was going to, which was Warner Laughlin. And I was living with an ex-boyfriend at the time, and I could walk there, and I couldn't really drive because I just moved from New York. And so I got into that class, and but you just don't know in the beginning. It's so hard to get your foot in the door. You don't even know who to go to, or how do you get an audition? How do you do any of it? And so I started at that class, and then I'm you know, you meet people, and then I ended up doing a year of Meisner with Donna Morong and Deb Aquila. They have a studio. And then I found this amazing woman who was then kind of my, I guess, the main coach that I went to for ages was Judith Weston. And her approach changed everything for me, because before it had always been a group of actors in the same class all trying to get the same thing, but not really knowing how to do anything, because we're all just actors, and in many ways you need so much permission. You need somebody's words, and you need somebody's direction, and somebody's camera, and all of these things. But Judith Weston was doing this great thing where she had these director-actor workshops, and there would be people in the industry who were either editors or writers or special effects people, but already working in the industry. And they would do these workshops where they were coming in because they wanted to learn how to direct actors, and then we were the actors that they were directing. And it was this wonderful thing that took everyone else off a pedestal, because I think as an actor, you think that the director is just, well, he's the director, she's the director. I mean, you know, and it's that thing of just, it was very communal, and it taught me so much about, well, we all have it's, you know, it's collaborative effort, which I think sometimes when you're in acting classes, you forget that, you know?
So, I mean, at this point, you sort of had these different experiences. What do you do to prepare for a role now? What is your process like?
You know, it depends. It depends on the role. I like to do a lot of reading. I like to do a lot of research. You know, when it was Money Monster, I read so many books on economics. I read everything that Michael Lewis had written. I read a lot of Joseph Stiglitz, whatever I could, just because, you know, I have an interest in economics. I always have. That's why partly this film appealed to me so much. But I have never worked inside an office. You know, I don't really know anything about it, if I'm really honest, you know. So it was just a lot of trying to get your brain to think in that way. I mean, even, you know, way back, I did a couple of days on Escape Plan, and I was playing a CIA agent. So I read Legacy of Ashes, because it was the entire history of the CIA. And it was like, but it allows you to sort of get into the thinking of that world. And that, to me, is always an important way because so much is your thoughts, right? And so for Claire, it was a lot about, it was reading all of those books on the nurses and listening to music from the 40s and watching films from the 40s that I thought that maybe she might have seen. And the beginning of this season, because there was a lot of grief that Claire was dealing with, I read Joan Didion again and again, and I'd read those books, but A Year of Magical Thinking and Blue Nights, just because, I don't know, for me it starts in, you know, I guess it's a cerebral way, and then you let that channel through you, through your emotions.
Can you step into it and step out of it? Like, for example, with Outlander, if you're having a day where it's a very heavy day, do you need to stay in it, or can you, when, you know, cut is called, sort of go back and play Candy Crush on your phone or whatever?
Never play Candy Crush. But it depends. It definitely depends. I feel usually if I am in a scene with a partner, I can step away because for me, in those scenes, I'll have done all my preparation and I know that 50% of the work is going to be just getting what I'm getting from them. And, you know, I think that any actor who does not give as much as they can when it's not on their coverage is an asshole. I just think that. And that never happens on our show, and we always are there for each other because I don't think any scene is any good unless everyone's firing on all cylinders. So those days, you know, usually Sam and I mean, obviously there's a level of concentration needed or there's an amount of focus needed, but you know, sometimes we'll be goofing around. But when it's self-generating, when, you know, especially for the faith stuff, because you're there on your own and you're not having that provocation or you're not having that someone, you know, to work off, then those days it's definitely I go off on my own and I'll always have my music or whatever it is, and I'll sort of sit in that for as long as I can.
I would imagine also, you know, you talked about being in this fantastical experience, you know, you can't help but think the costuming and it would play into that a lot. I mean, how helpful is feeling that corset and, you know, having to navigate around the bustle or what have you?
Well, you know, so much of what we do is our imagination, and especially sets and all of those things. When someone else is taking care of a lot of the work for you in terms of what you need to use your imagination for, then you can concentrate on the real work, which is the inner life and the emotions or whatever is needed. The corset's such a funny one. It's such a, I mean, it definitely helps with your deportment and how you carry yourself and all of that. But it's such a weird thing as an actor because it cuts off your main supply of oxygen and your grounding. And, you know, there are times when, you know, especially I remember there was in season 1, myself and Tobias had this big long scene where we're sitting at a table. It was Ep 6, and it's this fantastic scene between Blackjack and Claire, and he's going through this whole conversation, and she's trying to keep it together, and then she tries to, you know, she goes after him verbally. And you just, especially when you're sitting, you just don't have any air. And so in some ways it's helpful because it brings this sort of, I mean, as women would have been then, this sort of emotionality or I don't know how to describe it exactly because it's weird because as an actor you kind of just want your voice, but it's not always there. So it's an interesting thing, and wearing it for like day after day for a long period of time, I mean, bloody hell, those things are not, it's not good for your health, you know, it's just not. But it does feed into a lot of the frustration I think that Claire feels as well. I'm feeling that frustration too. So, you know, it does help.
Absolutely. You talked a little bit about the time that it took to sort of produce the first season and how surprising that was. I mean, from a performance perspective, what did you find surprising about working on episodic television over such a long period of time? What did you not expect about that you sort of learned throughout the first year?
Well, it's been able to play the long game, you know, and I also think, you know, for us, it's so great that we have the source material, because, you know, you're not getting scripts, you know, super far ahead of time. So knowing in general from the books where your character is going and what's going to happen, then you can start playing things earlier on, even before it's maybe in the book, or, you know, especially with the Claire and Jamie relationship. It was, you know, for Sam and I to be able to just start playing those little things. And but I felt it more in season 2, because I felt season 1 for Claire especially was so reactionary. And I remember sometimes saying to the writers, I'm like, but this just happened. She wouldn't still feel sad, you know, or, and there's just the nature of the show was that she really was just surviving from moment to moment. And I guess a lot of realizing what that journey was, season 1, was also in hindsight, realizing that, you know, that the performance had carried through that matched that. But I guess in season 2, I was more conscious or more aware of what I wanted, you know, I don't know. So season 2, it just felt so good to be able to just explore it in a deeper way and sort of make sure that, you know, you were talking to writers early on about, well, what's that going to be, and what's that going to happen, you know, what's going to happen with that. And I feel like because this has happened, I'd really love to see this. And, you know, and again, you know, I feel very lucky that we have that open dialogue.
What has been your choice with the books? Are you reading them before each season? Like before season 2, you read book 2, or have you read them all and then you just refer to them?
There's 8 books and they're all about 900 pages long. No, I read each book before the season, which I also think is, there's so much information. I mean, Diana's books are so detailed, and, you know, it's too much information. I think it's so important, I mean, to read the book, I think, for the season that we're doing. And I definitely go back to it a lot. You know, when we'll be filming certain parts of, you know, the book or certain episodes, I'll go back to that part in the book and reread it and sort of gain more information, because especially in the books, you get a lot of Claire's inner thinking. So it's so helpful. I mean, I don't know how actors do it when they're on like a, you know, episodic and they don't know where they're going at all. I mean, that must be such an interesting challenge as well, but it's really great for us to know.
Yeah, because, you know, unlike I think a lot of other shows that are adapted from books, there's a lot more deviation. Like in, obviously, Outlander, the television show, is doing things that are not in the books. But I mean, what's your relationship with that? Are you sort of looking at the books as canon, or are you sort of finding a balance between relying on the script and relying on the book?
No, well, once we get the scripts, I mean, you know, I'll read the book before, and then it's like dipping back in, you know. But it's like, you know, we all enjoy the book, and it's funny. Sometimes you'd be like, but wait, we're not doing that part, but that was so good. But I've already thought about what that would mean, you know. And you know, there's a lot of reasons why things have to change. I mean, you know, because of locations, or because we did something in season 1, then we can't do it now in season 2 from this book because that doesn't make sense. Or so it's funny, even now we just had a conversation with our showrunner and the writers. Sam and I had dinner with them last week and talking about book 3, and I was like, are we doing this bit? And they were like, no, so we can't do that bit. And I'm like, what? But that bit's the best, you know. And it's like, but then, you know, there is so much that we do get to retain, and I also think it's nice when they add in things that, you know, no one expects. And that's because, you know, it's a different medium, it's a different entity, so it's nice for it to have its own identity, I think, in a way as well, you know.
Absolutely. From an acting perspective, has there been a scene or a challenge that's been presented to you through Outlander that you sort of found the toughest to crack the nut of?
You know, I it's funny. It's always the silly little things like time. You know, it's always like when they expect that you can just cry like that, and they show up and they're like, right, we're going to do that scene now. Can you go? And you're like, oh, yeah, I want to say a certain thing. Like, you know, it was, it just feels like telling tales at a school. But it's a production, you know. This is the thing, as actors, you want to, you know, you're so protective of your process and all of these things. And sometimes it's just like, they need it sun's going down, you got to just produce the goods. And, you know, at season 1 or ep 1 this season, when we did that whole where Claire comes through the stones, and, you know, they gave a lot of time to that. And then it was like, oh, we have an hour, we got to go drive to the road, and you're going to meet the guy who comes, and then just have a breakdown. And I'm like, and it's weird because then you find a way to generate it. And I got so pissed at certain people that I internalized it and I made it work for me. And but you have to, you know, so.
In just a season and a half, you know, Claire has gone on such a journey, as we were saying before. I mean, she's evolved so much as a person. She's really learned and grown and fallen deeply in love. I mean, what have you enjoyed about playing that journey so far?
I mean, so much. It's, you know, I've gotten to play a woman now, you know, over a long period of time who's gone through many, many different challenges. And, you know, to me, what's always really interesting is how do events and how does life change you? What stays the same? What changes? What do you carry with you? What do you let go of? You know, that's been really interesting. And you know, I love the idea of, you know, nothing is black and white. And in Claire's world, that's more true than anything. And I love that complexity of, you know, having loved someone and then circumstances changing, and now you've felt something different. So now that changes everything you've ever had before. And it's just, yeah, it's just living someone else's life. It's so much better than mine, you know? But it is, I don't know, it's just, it's really great to be able to have that time. And you know, if anyone knows the books, like going forward, it's just so rich, the world. And, you know, I just think as an actor, it's just a dream job.
Yeah, absolutely. We took some questions from our audience, and now I'm going to ask them. The first question is from, so loud, sorry, Dwight. He wants to know, how has your life changed since landing Outlander?
Well, Dwight and I were in an acting class many years ago together. I believe I drove you through a red light one day, didn't I, on Hollywood? Nice to see you. How has it changed? You know, in many ways for the better. I didn't have a job for a very long time. I was schlepping around West Hollywood doing what I could do. No, that sounds really bad. I wasn't doing that. I wasn't doing that. But no, it's great. You know, I get to do what I love, and that makes many things in one's life very good.
Absolutely. Our next question is, how much time do you typically have to work on each script before you start shooting that episode?
A day or two. Look, we get the scripts longer in advance, but you know, you're working every day. You're working 14-hour days. You're generally trying to work on that week's stuff. I usually try at the weekend to do all my prep for the week. I don't generally learn my lines though until the night before, but I'll do a lot of preparation. I'll put in, you know, most of my Sunday is kind of working on the following week. And then, you know, but that's the tough thing about TV. That's the biggest challenge, is finding time to look ahead and start thinking about what's coming while also doing what you're doing. But usually, you know, we'll take I think, do we take one production day and then we'll have the day of the read through and then we start the next day. So it's sometimes, luckily, it'll fall over a weekend, so that'll be good. But yeah, it's tough. I think that's the hardest thing. I
mean, but is it helpful to sort of be in it as it's happening? I mean, you know, you're sort of playing her on a constant basis, so it's sort of not like you're jumping into a different film every week where it's a whole new person. And
well, yeah, I mean, obviously, just the very fact that you are playing this one character for so long and you're so immersed in it, I'm sure that you know, that's definitely helpful, because you're kind of just in it. You know, I don't know. Sometimes you're like, you know, there's certain actors in our show that they get to go away for a few weeks and then they come back and they have so many ideas. And you're like, especially Tobias, like he just comes in with so many good ideas and you're like, fuck you. If I had time, I would try and have ideas too, but right now I know my lines, okay? But you never know. Sometimes I think not overthinking things can be really helpful. And then also maybe sometimes it would be nice to have more time, but that's just the luck of the draw.
Absolutely. Yvette wants to know, and I thought this was an interesting question. You know, obviously the show plays on the idea of lineage so much. Has it inspired you to look at your ancestry?
Oh, good question. Well, I'm Irish. We've been Irish for a very long time. You know, usually, you know, when I come to America, lots of people have very interesting family histories, but both my parents' families probably came from the same mountain for very, you know, centuries and centuries. So let's just hope there was no crossbreeding at some point. But yeah, it's as boring as that. We're just Irish. Sorry.
What about the accent for you? I mean, how much time did you spend perfecting the dialect, and sort of what's your maintenance on it, I guess?
Well, when I first went to Scotland, we had about, I'd say 2 weeks before we started filming, and there was a dialect coach. And very early on, you know, it was trying to figure out, I didn't want Claire to be so clipped in RP that she wouldn't have an earthiness to her. Because she had to be acceptable to the Scots, and I wanted her to have a little bit of difference to the rest of the red coats and all of that. So, you know, we worked a little bit in the beginning. I am the type of actress, though, that I cannot have people coming in and correcting me all the time unless it's the director. So I like to do all my work before, and then, you know, if it's, for me personally, I kind of feel like unless it's a glaring problem or a glaring mistake, then what's important is the essence of the scene. And what's important is, am I affecting this person? Are they affecting me? If my put is not put enough, it might not matter. No, but it's funny. Some actors have so much patience. Some actors can have people come in and talk about getting the "k" on the, you know, can't. And I don't know whether that's so important, but you know, everyone has their own process. And for me, I probably just don't have enough patience for it. But I do think for me, it's always about doing the prep beforehand. Sure. And flagging things before, and then on the day, I just have to be in the zone and left alone.
I like that. And it rhymes. Our next question is from Michaela, and she wants to know, what is something you know now that you wish you knew when you were first starting out as an actor?
Well, that's a really good question. God, not to give your power away. Not to like go into a room and need it. And that's such a stupid thing to say, because when you're starting out, you do. But, you know, I feel like everyone has something that they can bring to a character, and it's like a transaction. It shouldn't be, please like me and please give me this. It should be, this is what I do. If this works for you, then that's great. But, you know, it's easy to say that when now I have a job. And if I don't have a job in a few years, I'll be like, back to please. But yeah, I just, you know, it's so tough being an actor. It's so tough when you start out. It's so hard to get through the gate. And I have endless compassion for every single person who's doing it, because it's just so heartbreaking, and everything changes when you get a job. All of a sudden people remember your name. People, you know, want to call you, and it's, you know, when you don't, it's like you've leprosy, you know, it's like, it's weird. It's a weird thing. Yeah. So I wish I knew that. No, I don't know. I wish I knew a lot.
Well, I think we have all learned a little bit tonight. Caitriona, thank you so much for coming out. I really appreciate it. Thank you to all of you. And don't forget to keep watching Outlander, everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.